RSPCA presents Animal Futures, hosted by Kate Quilton. Episode 6. Why do we all need nature?
Welcome back. I'm broadcaster, journalist, and RSPCA ambassador Kate Quilton, and today I'm talking about nature, one of the big themes of the RSPCA Animal Futures project. What will happen to nature in the future? Will we protect it, or might we lose it? In this episode, I speak to broadcaster and naturalist Steve Backshall about nature and why it matters to him and his family, how it's been so integral to not only his career, but his well-being too. I absolutely loved chatting to Steve. I think I now might love him almost as much as my 6-year-old does, who is a huge Deadly 60 fan. His passion for nature is infectious. I really think you're going to enjoy this. So, hey, I really would love to talk to you, I guess, about nature and where it all started for you.
Yeah, I think I'm incredibly lucky in that my parents, although not themselves coming from privilege, were always obsessed with nature with a capital N and the outdoors and adventure and travel. And both of them spent their entire working lives working for British Airways. And the reason they did that was so that they could travel the world and go to cool places and give my sister and I the opportunity to have a kind of investigative childhood that otherwise they would never have been able to afford if it wasn't for the fact that they were working for the airlines. And it was such an integral part of my childhood, growing up surrounded by animals, surrounded by wild space, and then being able to, see the most exotic sides of our planet. And this is from, being a babe in arms. It was something I just took for granted.
That is extraordinary. So basically you were Steve Backshall, as we know and love right now, but literally fresh out the box. That's
Yeah.
what you were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that while as kids, my sister was very much into the domestic animals, particularly horses. I, from the moment I could crawl, was going into the compost heap looking for snakes and snakes' eggs and looking for worms and beetles, and that was apparently my thing from the very first moment I could move. And I've seen the exact same thing in my oldest, in my boy, 6 years old. From the first moment he could crawl, his instinct was to move towards anything natural, and that was the thing that most inspired him and calmed him and gave him all the things that he needs.
So if you hadn't have had that, right? If Steve Backshall didn't have that exposure to nature from a young age, how do you think that would have changed your life? Would you be where you are now?
No, definitely not. Where I would be, who knows? I think that nature has been so many things for me. It's been a career. It's been a way of filling my days. It's also the thing that I know I always have in my back pocket as a way of just sorting my head out. If I ever feel overwhelmed by stress and anxiety, if I have big ideas that are too much for me, if there are struggles with work or with a family that I find too much, I'll take myself off for a kayak up the river. I'll go bird watching. I will do something, probably physical, definitely outdoors and in a natural environment. And within seconds, it has dropped my heart rate, brought me back to me. And I've been able to do that for the last 30 odd years. And to begin with, it wasn't something that I'd actually processed. It was just something that I did. It was something I found myself doing. I was in a funk. I was cross. I was angry, and the next thing I knew, I was striding across the fields out on a run, and I hadn't figured out why. But now I really do know why, and I know that if I'm in a bad place, I need to go to a good place.
Wow. So it's very conscious for you now. It's almost medicinal.
It is. And, I've had so many people in my line of work who have had even more definitive connections, people who have struggled with depression and loss and, really major psychological issues and problems and trauma that have been solved, in inverted commas, through bird watching, that have been solved through climbing or kayaking. That they personally, as an individual, I'm not saying that this is genuinely a panacea for all ills in our civilization, but for some people, it is the solution to everything that can be bad in life. And I've seen that so markedly in so many people, talking about prescribing nature on the NHS now, prescribing exercise on the NHS now. Well, that should have been being done for decades. We've known and understood about the benefits of the outdoors, of our connection to animals for a long, long time. And that it is only now in this day and age that we are starting to quantify that is actually kind of bonkers.
I could not agree more. Wow. Okay, so tell me a little bit about how nature plays a part in your family life with your kids.
So I think that, for Helen and I, when we first had kids, we were both crazy busy and we didn't ever really sit down and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is going to be our strategy for raising our children. And if we had done that, it would have fallen apart at the first hurdle anyway. But right from the very start, we were living on a houseboat at the time while we were building our present house. We were there at the riverside with swans and ducks coming to the back door to be fed for breakfast every morning, and kingfishers landing on the prow of the boat, every single morning and evening. And so the rhythms of the river were our life. They were the thing that dominated our early parenting. And so that wasn't something that was in any way structured. It just happened. We were outside all the time. And, Logan was a year or so before we moved off the boat. And even then, we're living in the middle of farmland. We are surrounded by nature all the time. And it instantly became obvious that if ever a screen came on, there was an unhealthy fixation with that and a kind of a wrench whenever that would be removed. Whereas, to the contrary, if we were to go outside and play down by the river, if we were to go for a wander in the fields, there was just a calm and a tranquility and an ease and a desire to investigate everything around him, which was, far, far greater once we had the twins as well. And it was just so obvious and remains so obvious now that the things that really make them happy, they desire all the technology stuff. And, of course they have to have a certain amount of it. We are living in this day and age. So of course they do. But you can see how much more peaceful, tranquil, happy, at ease they are when they're outside and they're doing physical things, and animals too. And it's not just nature, although that's my particular passion, but it's very clear that, taking a dog for a walk, stroking a dog, going to the local petting zoo, those connections to animals have a big impact on kids. And to see it in kids and not believe that it doesn't do the exact same thing for us would be staggeringly naive. So yeah, it's been everything for our family to this point, everything. And I really, really hope that it can continue to be into the future. But I'm very aware that our kids are young and that they are going to grow up, start getting their own passions, and that there will only be a certain amount of my thing that I can impose on them. I just hope that we've done enough in these formative years that they will continue to seek it out.
Hmm. What's the current family favourite?
We at the moment love wild swimming. We spend a lot of time in the water. Logan has started surfing for the first time at 6 years old, which is just absolutely amazing because they're so small, got very, very low center of gravity. Stick them on a surfboard and boom, off they go. It's like Hawaii 5-0. It's absolutely amazing.
That's
Um,
incredible.
I know. Climbing is something that's huge for all of them. I think that there's a very natural instinctual desire for kids to hang off stuff. And all three of them are just like hanging from one arm in ways that I would kill to be able to do off the rings, off the climbing frames, off trees. So those things
I
are
mean,
a
you're not
massive
far off,
go-to.
Steve. You're not far off.
Oh, I mean, I would seriously. They look like little chimpanzees. It's absolutely genius. If I could do that, I would be eternally happy.
How brilliant, though, to be living with those role models for you.
What them role models for me? I mean, it kind of feels that way.
Inspired to hang by one arm. Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant. And so when you look at projections for the future, you have this very unique global perspective on all of this, travel the world. You are a brilliant dipstick in terms of, okay, what's going on?
Have you seriously just described me as a brilliant dipstick? I am going to get business cards with Backshall brilliant dipstick.
Okay,
I love it.
that's it. In terms of a global perspective, so yes, you are. You're the dipstick in the engine. That's Steve Backshall in the engine of the world. How are we doing? Have we got any oil left? No, we don't want to. Let's not talk about oil. But you do have this phenomenal, unique perspective. Where do you feel we're going? Like, where are we going to look? How are we going to look in 2050?
That's so interesting. And although I've never thought of myself as a brilliant global dipstick, I think that there are ways that my profession and my traveling have given me a very unique perspective. They've given me, because I've been doing this for a very, very long time. I first started doing expeditions in 1990, and I've been going back to the same places over and over again. So I've seen them change over time, within 35 years, and a lot of places have changed out of all consideration. That I look at places that I first went to in my early expeditions, and the changes are stratospheric. I do need to be very aware that I, by no accident, have always kind of chosen the best places to go to. I'm usually going to the wildest places in the world. I'm usually going to the places where we have the best chances of finding wildlife. And although I do conservation programs, going to the bad places is a small amount of the traveling that I do. I tend to see our planet at its very best, and I tend to meet people at their very best as well too. So I've got to be aware that despite this vast expanse of experience, knowledge, and traveling, I'm still in a bubble, and it's important to be aware of that. I think the change over time thing is probably the thing that's most important. Let's take, for example, my very first ever expeditions on my own in 1990 were in Borneo, and I saw this vast jungle island that at the time, you could go up in a light aircraft and you could look out to the horizon and see nothing but perfect, pristine primary rainforest, filled with orangutans and proboscis monkeys and clouded leopards and, paradise on earth. And then I came back when I was writing the rough guides in 1997 during the year of the Great Burn, when a huge expanse of Southeast Asia was essentially on fire in places you could only see like 100 meters because the smoke was so dense and so thick. And then when I came back again for things like Expedition Borneo to 2005, you go up in a light aircraft and you look out to the horizon and pretty much all you see is palm oil, just this monoculture expanse of the identical one single tree, the biodiversity largely gone. And I've seen that happening all the way through to my most recent expeditions, where we're visiting tiny pockets of rainforest within those vast plantations, but you're also starting to get a sense of how important those remaining fragments are and how much is invested in making sure they, as repositories of biodiversity, are treasured and taken care of. And sorry, I'm going to probably go off on one now, but while we're talking about Borneo, the thing that I think I had the most intense experience with was one of my more recent expeditions, where we went searching for ancient cave art, which had not been seen before, not been discovered before. I was lucky enough to be with a local expert who is the international expert in this kind of cave art. And we found a cave in the middle of Sangkularang in eastern Borneo, filled with 50,000-year-old handprints from our ancestors. And you wander around these caves. Yeah. I mean, it just sends the hackles up on the back of your neck looking around at it. But you look around these caves, and what you see is that the people there 50,000 years ago, who physically are anatomically identical to us as humans today, had the exact same things that they wanted out of life. They were looking for shelter from the elements. They had signs that they were mourning the death of their young and of relatives in the way that they created the art around these caves. nothing has changed in that 50,000 years to us as humans. And our connection to nature throughout that has been constant. Nature has been the place we exist. It has been our source of food. It has been a potential source of all of our comfort and all of our discomfort. It has been everything, everything to us for 50,000 years. And then in the last 100 years, which is nothing. I mean, that doesn't even occur in evolutionary time. It's a blink. It's a whisper of evolutionary time. Everything has changed, and our disconnect to nature in that time is stratospheric, and we cannot possibly have hoped to keep up with all those changes. We still need nature. It is still critical to us in the back of our reptile brains, whether we like it or not. And we need to know that. We need to be aware of that in our modern world, where we have this critical disconnect with the very thing that defines us.
Why do you think we are disconnected now?
I think that, first of all, you can't look away from overpopulation. When I was a kid, there were half as many people on the planet as there are today. When my parents were kids, there were a third as many people on the planet as there are today. Increasingly, we're living in urban environments. And all of the technology that I am going to sound like an ancient old fuddy-duddy that I am decrying is enticing. It's bewitching. It has us under its spell. So of course we're losing our contact. It's inevitable. I was talking about it with my kids. I know, and they kind of know that they're happiest when they're outdoors and when they're running around kicking a football or climbing a tree. They know that. But if there was a television on in the house, then they'd sit down and watch it, and they'd find it very, very difficult to tear themselves away. It is designed to be addictive. That is a part of all of these technological advances, is they are designed to make us want to use them. And while I, as a 50-year-old ancient old git, can have the willpower to force myself to be dragged away from them, that's impossible for my kids. At this present moment in time, I need to be the thing stepping in there and providing the barrier and the rules. I'm not going to be able to do that in 10 years' time.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about technology as well, I mean, it's evolved, designed to be even stickier than it was. When we were kids and, we watched a bit of telly, it wasn't that same cocoon immersive experience that you get when kids are there, they're hitting buttons, stuff's happening. It is so, so sticky.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's absolutely it. And I had to be careful. I can say all this stuff when I'm talking to you here now on this podcast, but I can't say any of this when I'm talking to young people. The second I say the things that I'm saying now, I become that ancient, irrelevant old git that they're not going to listen to. I have to be aware that that technology is good. There are so many benefits that technology has brought to us, and that there are so many ways that this addictive technology is fun, is entertaining, has brought great developments to our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be very aware of that too, because messaging is so important, but particularly when you're talking to young people.
Yeah, and it's the paradox that I guess you and I are both engaged in, as in we make television for a living, and we make television about things to kind of, I guess, spread information and knowledge. And for you, in terms of your work, it's amazing when my kid settles in and watches Deadly 60 and his mind is blown, and it's expanded his perspective of the world and is encouraging him to get out in nature. So yeah, it's a fine balance. But what I also found really interesting in terms of, I guess, my experience hearing you say, look, I go to a lot of really beautiful places on the world where there's a lot of wildlife, that's the gig. You're not really deliberately going to, the most shocking spots in the world where there's been devastation, destruction, deforestation. And the same goes for me, which makes me think about, how true is the perspective that I guess we project in the world. You want to make a beautiful, very watchable TV show about how amazing and incredible the world is and how it is thriving. And actually, in reality, it maybe isn't the case,
I think I've been quite impressed with how, particularly children's BBC over the last few years, and over my last couple of series of Deadly 60, my kids' wildlife series, have been prepared to engage in the toughest conservation topics and haven't shied away from the negatives. And I think that we have to work really hard to make sure that we still tell those very important stories, while at the same time being aware that when it comes to conservation messaging, we cannot overwhelm young people. We cannot give them that horrible sense that the world is screwed and there is nothing they can do about it. We need to tell those stories. We need to show the ways that we are doing terrible damage, but as often as possible to give it a possible positive ending, to make the message empowering, to put the tools of change into young people's hands. And if you do that, then there are very few things that we can't talk about. But you know, to me, it is still shocking. It is still shocking when I deliberately go to somewhere where you see rampant deforestation. When you walk inside a palm oil plantation, which we did on a Deadly 60 last series, actually, and you walk through the tropical rainforest and have this cacophony of sound with the deafening cicadas and the frogs and the birds, the gibbons calling off in the distance, singing across the treetops. And then you walk into a palm oil plantation and it is silent, absolutely dead silent. There is nothing living there apart from the occasional rat. And, I do find it, I find it, as someone who, gets to see the very, very best of our planet, and as someone who, is a rational, qualified zoologist and conservationist, I find it overpowering. I find the dread, almost too much to bear. So you've got to have that in the back of your mind, because if I do, then kids certainly will.
And to bring that back to the UK, I think, that experience is relatable. If you go into, I guess I live in the middle of Suffolk and I'm looking out the window and I can see kind of a monoculture, I can see lots and lots of corn. I can see these fields where ultimately get into the middle of them, you're not going to hear much and you might not see much.
I couldn't agree more. I'm lucky enough that I live on farmland of a wonderful farmer, James and Tina, who yes, they farm the main fields relatively intensively, but they absolutely treasure nature, and they maintain hedgerows, they maintain wild places around their big area of farm here. And for the last 3 years, they've left one big field, which is worth an awful lot of money to them if it was full of crops. They have left it as a wildflower meadow, and it's the field that you drive out past and back to get to our houses. And you
Wow.
see all the local residents just driving past and just stopping every beginning of every day. They just stop, they go out, they walk, and it is so uplifting. That one single field of flowers has made everybody's lives better. Not don't even think about the biodiversity. Don't even think about the return of the insects and the pollinators and all of the strange bugs that all of a sudden we have back on our patch that we did not have 3 or 4 years ago. The explosion of butterflies that I'd almost forgotten existed, and micro moths, and all these things that have come back because of that one single field. It's the to the topic that we're talking about today, that has made everybody who lives around here's life better, because you see that splash of color, that reminder of what nature can offer, even here in our dowdy, dreary old country, that actually there is plenty to treasure. And when it's allowed to flourish, it can be sensational. Absolutely, a gaudy, flamboyant explosion of color, and then everything else that follows it. You've got roe deer wandering through the middle of the field, foxes playing around the outside, badgers coming in to dig for worms and beetles, and it's one field. So yeah, I mean, I'm in danger of becoming a little bit preachy when it comes to this topic.
Not at all. I mean, it's interesting this, isn't it? You start to think, okay, well, is the challenge here? How do we put systemic value on those wildflower meadows, So, and instead of, like a farmer perhaps looking at it and seeing pound signs in terms of, okay, if I grow X amount of corn, I'm going to get this much money. There needs to be some systemic change whereby actually, do you know what? If you keep that as a wildflower meadow, it means X, because on a global scale, there is a fundamental cash value to preserving all these things, including the Amazon rainforest, of course. But at the moment, we're all still locked in this short-term thinking, 5 to 10-year plans, especially, in the Amazon rainforest and elsewhere. It's just the quick buck. Got any ideas about that, Steve?
I have some, very, very strong ideas about that. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when Michael Gove was Secretary of State for the Environment, he brought me on to get involved with writing up the State of Nature report and the Environment Bill that was to follow it. It took up a huge amount of time and effort and energy, not just for me, but for all of the other NGOs that got involved and did so much incredible work to create these reports and to create the bill that followed. And I was had the incredible honor of announcing this bill to the media, to the public, and being able to talk about it alongside the then Secretary of State for the Environment. And it dropped and disappeared without a trace. And, nothing has been done. And a huge part of that was about exactly what you're talking about. It was about, putting into law the need to maintain spaces for nature, knowing how much they can give to us, the stupendous beyond economic bottom line things that they can do for people, for the environment, for the country as a whole.
Gosh, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, Steve, do you have dark days? Do you have days when you think, oh God, it looks bad where this is going?
Yes, of course I do. Of course I do. And I think that, some of the darkest days are when I start to see these things through my children's eyes. So as I've said, my kids are already very, very connected to nature, have a real emotional connection to animals and to wildlife. And as they are starting to pick up and understand some of the very basic challenges that animals in our modern world face, and you just see this look of total lack of comprehension in their eyes. How could anyone do that to an animal? How could anyone do that to a forest? How could anyone do that to a single tree, let alone to, a nation filled with trees? And that's when I do start to really feel despair. I think for myself, I've been doing this for such a long time that I'm more pragmatic, and I have more ways of, looking at problems and trying to think of solutions. And I'm quite a naturally positive person, so I have that enthusiasm and that desire to go, right, well, there's a problem, let's go out and do something about it. Let's find a way of solving it. But when you see it through the eyes of a 6-year-old, that's when it gets crushing.
And so what do you think needs to happen? What do you think needs to happen in, the next few decades to protect and preserve nature for the next generations?
So I'm reading this morning through the RSPCA's Wilberforce report and looking at some of the catastrophic suggestions of what could happen, and some of the enticing and intriguing ideas for the more positive potential. And I think one of the things that really piqued my interest was a suggestion that there might be a massive positive swing in our attitudes. It's unlikely, but it might happen. And talking about things like for example, advances in AI to allow us to understand better the conditions that animals are under because of us. I've been studying cetacean, that is whale and dolphin communication, for about the last decade now, and we are on the cusp of using AI to start to really understand what whales and dolphins are saying. We already understand that they have their own name that they use to introduce themselves when they start a conversation with another member of the same species, that they have syntax, that they have different dialects, but for different ecotypes or different tribes of the same species. We are starting to get to that place. might it be that in 10 years' time, all of a sudden AI starts to unlock the kind of things that animals are thinking and saying? Might we then start to readjust our thinking? Could it be that on the day that machine learning first actually interprets what a dolphin is saying, that half the human population just go, sod that, I'm going vegan? You know, there is a possibility, an out there chance that something might happen that could swing all of our perspectives on how we deal with nature. Now, as the report intimates, that is unlikely, but there are lots of other potential tipping points that could awaken our understanding and our interest. You know, when it comes to things like climate change, it has been such a long slog. You know, I first made my first program about climate change in the year 2000, and we were essentially saying the same things as we're saying now. Everything that all of those scientists predicted back there in the year 2000 have come true. And yet still there are millions of people in this country alone who do not even think it's a thing. Well, when does that tipping point come? Because, you know, I've been to Arctic communities and I've been to, you know, low-lying island republics in the Indian Ocean where climate change is the number one concern. You know, it's not something that people consider to be off there in the future. It is the thing that is the waking issue of every single person, every single politician. Our nation is going to be underwater in my time, not just my kids' time, but in my time. So those tipping points in perception are really important. Do those exist for people in this country? Do they exist for people in China and America and Russia? As yet, I don't know, but it's that could be one of the answers and one of the things that I think we should keep as a possible positive in the back of our minds.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I spent time filming on the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific, and I was there maybe even 10 years ago. And even 10 years ago, you know, the community anticipates big waves. They're just going to sweep over the island, you know? And it happens regularly. And a big storm comes in and they find that actually, because it's such a tiny little strip, you know, well, the ocean just meets the ocean, you know, and they just meet in the middle. And this happens a lot. And they're thinking,
Yeah.
okay, we've got to move off this island in the next 10 years. What are we going to do? And it's so, so present. But then for those of us that exist in those, you know, middle zones around the planet, you know, where actually, okay, we're not experiencing the same extreme changes yet. And you feel slightly like there's just going to be a sudden knee jerk to, oh God, we really got to turn the temperature down now. We've got to do it, you know? Do you think it's the case that people are truly cognizant about what nature really means to us?
There are a lot of people who, like me, it's at a level where nature is as good as a religion to them. You know, you could call them pantheists, I guess. And those people are very, very aware, and you know, it is everything to them. They are, I would suggest, a fairly small subsection of our society, and we need to do all we can to coax non-believers into the fold. We need to make sure that nature is accessible and available to everyone. My good friend Dwayne Fields, who's just been made Chief Scout, did a program for Country File a couple of years ago about how people of colour feel that the countryside is not accessible or available to them. And, you know, his piece was very much about, is this perception or is this a reality? And either way, we need to do something about that. You know, we need to make sure that nature is something that appeals to and appears to be accessible to absolutely everyone, no matter where you come from, no matter what your background, your beliefs. It doesn't matter. We need to make nature genuinely appealing for everyone because frankly, we know what it can give people. So I think that's an area that I possibly can have a role to play in. You know, I'm in the media. I'm in a part of the media that can speak particularly to young people and to families. And I see it as a big role to make sure that nature just comes across as being cool. there's an awful lot of nature broadcasting, which actually, frankly, is aimed at people like me. And it tends to be embracing your inner nerd and embracing your inner geek and, treasuring the invertebrates and the butterflies. And that's great. That's fantastic. But we also need to be available to sending the messages of the wild world to everyone, no matter what their persuasions or what they think they're interested in.
More broadly, do you think that an inaccessibility to nature is happening here, happening in other countries around the world?
Frankly, no, I don't. I think that we have a very green and pleasant land. We have a nation of animal lovers. We have so many small reserves that are available and accessible to just about anyone, and that includes in our inner cities. There are very few places around the world that have as many parks and wildlife reserves in urban areas as we do here in the UK. But people don't necessarily know about them. That quite often you might have a reserve just around the corner from you and have no idea it exists. So how do we solve that problem? How do we do a better job of getting youngsters to embrace the nature on their own doorstep, frankly? And I think that, here where I live, there are lots of forest schools. There are lots of ways that pretty much every school around here will have an afternoon a week, a morning a week, where kids are going to be schooling in the local woods. They're going to be schooling in the local wildflower meadows, and that is an amazing thing. And the more that we can try and make that a part of the curriculum and an opportunity for everyone across the nation, the better. And then how do we do the same for adults? How do we do the same for families? That's another big challenge, because I can absolutely guarantee that the majority of people in this country do not know about their local wildlife reserve, do not know that it's open to, accessible to them just about any time. It's not that we are lacking nature. It is not that we're lacking wild spaces. It's kind of that a lot of people cannot or don't think they can access them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if I look at kind of my own experience with my kid, brilliant. In reception, yes, they did forest school and I helped out. It was every Friday morning and I was there and the kids, really, at one with nature, getting into it. And to be fair to the school, it's only a small space that the kids had to explore, but it was great. But it ended there, they don't do it kind of, in the years beyond. And it's almost a reprioritization at kind of every level, be it education, but then also within government. A lot of work to be done. Thank goodness we've got Steve. Do you know what I mean? Fighting the good fight.
The national dipstick.
I'd like to just, record my own pickup right now.
If you take that out, I will be so upset. That has got to stay in.
Come on. What you are, Steve, is you're probably our absolute best and extraordinary barometer for this.
Barometer is a better. No, I prefer dipstick. I'm going out. I'm going to change all my social media profile names right now. Steve Backshall, Global Dipstick.
Gives you information very quickly.
Thank you very, very much indeed. That is high praise indeed.
Steve, it's been an absolute joy. Our global barometer. An absolute joy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You are so welcome. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Steve. Huge thanks to Steve. Don't you just love him? He's a man on a mission to get everyone to care as much as he does about the natural world, which he quickly succeeds at. Spend a few minutes watching his shows and it is impossible to resist his passion and enthusiasm. The RSPCA wants to hear from you too. How does nature impact your life? What can we do to support it? And what might the natural world look like by 2050? You can tell us your thoughts by getting involved in the biggest ever conversation about animal welfare. Search Animal Futures, the big conversation. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and to the series. I really hope you've enjoyed listening to this series as much as I have enjoyed making it.
Animal Futures was hosted by Kate Quilton. With thanks to our guest today, Steve Backshall. The series was produced by me, Mark Adams, Chris O'Brien, Emily Prideaux, and Joe Toscano. Thanks for listening.